This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
With 132 million users and an unrivaled selection of sports trading cards and memorabilia, eBay is the home of collectibles. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's ebay.com/theathletic. Start building your collection today.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Charles Leclerc headed a surprise Ferrari 1-2 finish in the United States Grand Prix on a weekend when controversy raged on and off track. But with Max Verstappen extending his championship lead to 57 points, where does that leave Lando Norris and McLaren? And what happened to Mercedes' startling Friday speed? I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to tell all are Mark Hughes and Ben Anderson. Well, Mark, Cota's always a great weekend. It's been a good one this year, hasn't it? I haven't even driven up any one-way streets.
I only have your word for that. You haven't given me a lift this year, but it's fabulous. It's as always, and it's even better when you have the weather cooperating. And it served up a great race as it always does. And it's just a pleasure to watch F1 cars being bladdered around this incredible circuit with all its high-speed sweeps and its dives and climbs. It's just a lovely place and a lovely environment and a great vibe.
Yeah, and very much I would recommend anyone who's thinking about coming to this race do, because it's every bit as good as you'd imagine, if not better. Austin's a fantastic city, so I'd thoroughly recommend it. Ben, you've been following from afar, but you know Austin and Cota very, very well from your days here in the past. So it's great to watch even when you're not there, isn't it?
Oh, this one was right up there, I think. Even the sprint was good.
Even the sprint.
Yeah, probably one of the best sprints, I think. You know, everyone was aggressive. The races were definitely more exciting than the qualifying sessions, and the qualifying sessions weren't bad either. So yeah, I would say this is up there as probably one of, if not the best sprint Formula One weekend we've had. And yeah, as Mark outlined, a brilliant track, and just a really eventful, brilliant race to watch from afar.
Yeah, that means we've got loads to get into on the podcast as always. So we'll pile straight into it. And Mark, we'll start off with a traditional question about how it played out, because the race for victory was relatively straightforward. Ferrari turned that second row lockout into a 1-2 for Leclerc and Sainz. So how did the race run? How did Ferrari do it relatively easily? And how did Max Verstappen and Lando Norris fit into that picture?
Yeah, the Ferrari was, right from the start of practice, the Ferrari was always the quickest car on the medium tyre. It wasn't quite the quickest on the soft tyre. It had a little bit understeer in the soft, and of course that meant that it wasn't at its best in Q3. But even in Q3, on the last run, the one that got aborted by everyone because of Russell's accident, Sainz was putting in a lap that would have been within a sniff of pole. Not sure if he would have grabbed pole or maybe got a second or maybe even stayed third, but it would have been a very, very close run thing. The car had just come alive on that second run. So even on its least favoured tyre, it was quick, but on the medium tyre, which was the favoured tyre for the race, there was no question of what the quickest car was. You saw that in Q1 and Q2, where they're comfortably the fastest. And you saw it also in the sprint, where the Leclerc and Sainz had, spent several laps racing each other, like it was the Formula Ford Festival, and then took the battle to George Russell. And despite that, they still had more rubber left than Lando Norris, and Sainz was able to pass him going into the last lap as well. So I think with a little bit more, a few more laps, they would probably have been able to deal with Verstappen's Red Bull too. So that still left the question of how they were going to get track position in the Grand Prix itself, because they started from the second row. But that was all solved by Max Verstappen pushing Lando Norris wide at turn one, and that just the sea parted really for Leclerc. You just had a clear run down the inside, and Sainz had to just back off a little bit to avoid hitting Verstappen, so that gave Leclerc the momentum on Sainz too. And then Ferrari were able to undercut Sainz past Verstappen with a very early first stop for a one-stop race. But even despite carrying much older tyres in the second stint, Sainz still had the pace to easily pull away from Verstappen.
Sainz was the earliest person to stop without it dooming his race, because everyone who stopped earlier than him, their result was compromised. Yeah,
that's just how much pace they had in hand. The advantage Leclerc was pulling out over Verstappen in the early stages of the race was just amazing. He was sort of 7-8 tenths a lap, and you think, he's pushing a bit hard surely on heavy fuel, but actually it didn't make any difference. The longer the race went on, the bigger his gap got, and so it was just they trounced the opposition. It was pure performance. It was a pure performance 1-2. It wasn't anything circumstantial about it. And the Red Bull of Verstappen and the McLaren of Norris were actually quite closely matched, but they did their race in quite different ways. Once Lando was down in fourth after that first corner skirmish, they decided to run long, and so he was conserving his tyres in the early part of the stint, and then that was to enable him to go longer and get a tyre advantage in the second stint. And using that tyre advantage, he was able to catch up all that he'd lost to Verstappen in the first stint. And then they had their incident at turn 12 as Lando put the overtake on him, but Verstappen forced him to go off the track and complete the manoeuvre off the track, for which he got the 5-second penalty, which put him down to an official fourth, although he was third across the line.
Yeah, so it was surprisingly easy, this win for Ferrari. It always looked like they had the pace, so it was just that question of how to get to the front. And I did actually say that to ask Fred Vasseur about that at the end of the race. I said, actually, was that a little bit more straightforward even than you expected? Because there's always that question of how do you get to the front. And as you say, the Red Sea parted, and was it Dead Sea? Dead Sea, Red Sea? Dead Sea. Which sea are we parting?
We should call it the Red Sea, shouldn't we? Because it's the red team.
Ah, very good, very good. Yes, I like that now. Yes, it's too late in the day for me to be getting my references right here, unfortunately. But it was a really, really good win from Charles Leclerc. Just one of those performances where it's funny. Ferrari were doing so well in that race, you just barely saw them. Like Leclerc, you didn't see. If this was the 80s, you just have an hour and a half of a red car driving around on the TV coverage. But it's one of those ones where you're so good and the car's so quick and everything's together. So a lovely win for Charles Leclerc. But inevitably, Ben, the talk is all about Norris and Verstappen, isn't there? And in championship terms, great weekend for Max Verstappen. Eked out another 5 points, 3 for finishing ahead today and 2 for winning the sprint, with Norris third. But that first corner move on the opening lap and a turn 12 pass in the closing stages were the two key ones for them. So let's talk about those incidents specifically. So first up, lap 1.
Yeah, lap 1, turn 1. I think the first thing to say is Norris was too passive. He had the start. he moved across, but it was a kind of half-hearted move to cover the inside. He left a Verstappen-sized gap on the inside, and Verstappen filled that Verstappen-sized gap on the inside. Now, he did force Norris wide in making the pass. Obviously, that turn one at Kota going up the hill and then the turn tightening as you get to the top of the hill before the track plunges downhill, it's, I'd say, unique on the calendar in terms of its profile. So that plays a role in terms of how you judge the incident, because, you know, there being a runoff, often you see cars go wide there and then plunge down to the right-hander at the bottom of the hill coming back onto the track. There's a certain amount of first lap leeway, obviously, in terms of racing incidents and people running wide. You see that at most places. I do feel that Verstappen, according to the racing guidelines that the stewards use, he broke a couple of them. You know, he didn't leave Norris room, and he also went off the track himself, which you're not allowed to do. So we can only assume that they just said, you know, it's lap one, let them race. McLaren weren't happy about it, and you can see why, but it wasn't even noted, wasn't reported to the stewards. So we race on. The turn 12 incident later in the race is a little bit more contentious, but roles are reversed. Verstappen's the defending car. He's on the inside. Norris is the attacking car on the outside. There's a certain amount of, and this is a phrase you're fond of using, Ed, live by the sword, die by the sword, when you're trying to go around the outside of somebody. And I think that is taken into account as a general principle. So the guidelines and the perception, the rules, whatever, are not really in your favour automatically if you're the guy trying to come around the outside of another guy. I think Verstappen's aware of this, and he's probably the best defensive driver on the grid as well, in terms of maximising what's possible and what the wriggle room is. He definitely forced Norris off the track, but I would say probably at that moment, he's, according to the letter of the guidelines, far enough alongside the McLaren still to have legitimate claim to the corner, and then he runs him off at the exit. But because he's the defending car and not the attacking car, it seems that, you know, this idea that he should give room doesn't quite apply in the same way. And so he's managed to get away with it. And Norris copped a penalty because he went right off the track, kept his foot in and stayed ahead of the Red Bull. Really, he should have probably just conceded the place and tried to attack him again, because at that stage of the race, he was quick enough to beat the Red Bull, I think.
Yeah, that was the interesting question, wasn't it, Mark? Would McLaren have been wise just to say, I'll drop back and we'll do it again? Or do you think the fact that Verstappen had been driving brilliantly defensively for a few laps, you know, even before we get into those things where he's great at going to the limit of what's allowed, just good, solid, old-fashioned defensive driving before that, do you think McLaren and Norris just thought, oh, we don't want to go through that again? We don't reckon we'll necessarily get back past? Exactly
that. I think it's exactly that, because Norris caught Verstappen in a big old hurry, and you thought, oh, as soon as he gets DRS, he should comfortably be through. And just the laps tick by, and another lap, and another lap, and another lap, and he wasn't quite doing it. And he was just placing his car perfectly, and, you know, using the battery in all the right places. So, yeah, it was far from a given that he would ever get that place back if he surrendered it. So, I quite get what they were thinking. But in terms of, you know, positions being decided by a race steward being obliged to make a call, I think this is where it goes wrong. You know, we got to rethink defining track limits by white lines. It's got to be something physical there, so that it's a gravel trap or a bit of grass, so that it becomes a non-issue. And I think that's where it's gone wrong in terms of, you know, the rights and wrongs of it. Verstappen made no attempt to continue turning the corner once Lando was alongside him, and you would question if that's, you know, legitimate. But because it's all down to interpretation in these instances, that comes from defining the track by a line, by some arbitrary line, not a physical constraint.
This is exactly what we were talking about a few weeks ago on the podcast, wasn't it, Ben? When we were talking about, I think it was your proposal for coming up with natural track limits. We won't go in detail down that line again, but it is a little bit unsatisfactory, isn't it? Because you have the guidelines in place, and Verstappen quite rightly drives to them. He goes to the limit, and even if you think whether you think it's right or wrong, those are the rules. So you play to them, but it's just a bit unsatisfactory because it means we're talking about all this stuff. Whereas actually we should be spending a little bit more time on, wasn't that battle just fantastic? Because it was really gripping. It's rare you get those sorts of battles that go on sort of lap after lap. That series of laps before the turn 12 move were wonderful.
Yeah, it was a really exciting battle, which could have been for the lead, obviously, if they'd not tripped over each other at the first turn and given the track position to Ferrari. I mean, it's possible the Ferrari was so quick with its kind of medium tyre strength and what seemed like a bit of a strategic bias going into the weekend to think more about the race, less about qualifying, think more about the last sector and the slow turns, not worry too much about the high speed and that overall compromise being so difficult. And you had this fantastic fight between the two main protagonists, only for third place, but it was really fun to watch. But you could just sort of see how difficult it is for Norris to pull a move on Max. He's so aggressive in defence. Obviously, he's also the one who can benefit more if there's an incident because he's got this massive championship lead. Norris can't afford to have contact with him and ruin a race. And Max will know that too. So that's a strategic advantage for him. But for this battle to kind of reach a crescendo that's then dominated by talk about penalties and track limits and arbitrary racing rules and codification of the art form of racing. I mean, I don't want to get into that whole debate we had before, but to me, it's just stupid. We've ended up in this kind of complete mess where everything is trying to be done to the kind of letter of a law rather than done in a kind of more natural way. Mark said, natural track limits, that's what you need. And I imagine if this incident had happened somewhere like Austria, turn 4, where there's gravel on the outside, if Verstappen had run Norris wide into the gravel, and also if they touched, then I think it's a slam dunk, he gets a penalty. But he's very, very good at forcing the other car to the very edge of the circuit without actually making contact with them, and therefore managing to just skirt with the absolute limit of getting a penalty without getting one. He's almost like the Adrian Newey of driving. He knows exactly how to operate in the grey area of what the regulations are. And it's been happening kind of really since he started. He was probably slightly the wrong side of it earlier in his F1 career, where you had this kind of moving in the braking zone thing. He was a kind of main one, certainly in my era of covering F1, who kind of pushed the boundary there, and they had to try and kind of find a way to codify how to stop Max from doing that to too extreme a level, because you could see that it was a bit dangerous, but there was nothing strictly in the rules that said it couldn't be done that way. And then they kind of started working on that. But the more we've gone down this rabbit hole of, well, let's actually completely define how you race, what's acceptable, where a car should be at any given moment, the easier in some ways it's been for him to find a way to get round that, to find a loophole. And most of the time, he does it absolutely expertly. And yeah, it causes a stink, and you can look at the turn 12 incident as McLaren did and Andrea Stella did and say, our guy's been forced off the track. Stella used the argument that both cars went off the track, and therefore a beautiful piece of motor racing, which it was kind of unnecessarily spoiled and interrupted by this stewarding. But it's very difficult to legitimately claim a car that's ahead going into a corner, but behind coming out of it has gained an advantage, because by definition, you've lost a position. So, even though you kind of have some sympathy for Stella's argument, you can see where he's coming from. Actually, to the letter of the law, Verstappen's done nothing wrong.
Yeah, it's the letter of the law, of course, that counts. You should also note there was also in that battle that moment when Norris moved quite late in the braking zone for turn 1 as well. No action on that. It's just worth reminding everyone of that happening. A very quick question I just want to throw it at you, Mark, from Dan Neal related to this from the Race Members Club. Just saying, why did Lando not properly defend turn 1? It was so obvious Max would go out the inside given the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism. I think he needed to be more ruthless in going across. But you can't see very much from inside. It looks pretty obvious from the outside. where Verstappen is, and that there was actually room there for for Lando to completely shut the door, but you don't know from inside exactly where he is. You might be partly alongside your rear wheel, or if you go slamming the door shut really hard, you might be driving your car straight into the other car. I think that's the only buy I would give him on that. But generally, I think he got a better start. He was quicker off the line. As soon as he did that, he needed to get straight across as early as possible, and he wasn't quite decisive enough in doing that. And by the time he did it, he was having to think, where is he? Is he partly alongside me? And then I think that's where it all went wrong.
Maybe he didn't fully trust the quality of his start, because it's been a weak spot. He was definitely better this weekend, I think, in the sprint too. But obviously the Verstappen Red Bull starts are exceptional almost every time. So even if you've made a good one, you're probably, in terms of a strategic approach and accepting what Mark says about not having full vision, you're probably thinking, well, he's going to be there because Max is always there. So maybe you could give Norris a little bit of generous defence and say he must have been anticipating a part of the Red Bull at least still being there. And maybe if he had more confidence in the start he made, he would have just been more like Verstappen would have done, or Vettel or Schumacher, and just chopped straight across and blocked it.
Mark, what conclusions do you think we can draw from what we saw at the front this weekend? Has Ferrari turned a corner decisively? Is McLaren on the slide? Has Red Bull steadied the ship? And you can choose any one of those to tackle first.
I think that they're close enough that just a little bit of change of circumstance, a little bit of change of track layout, a little bit of change of temperature, track surface can just shuffle up the order. I think it's what seems to be clear, or what sort of was vindicated this weekend fully, was that the upgrade Ferrari put on the car at Monza, which has resulted in it being quick everywhere since, but Monza, Baku, Singapore, they're unusual circuits. This is the first time that there was a real litmus test of this upgrade, because it's a proper conventional, aerodynamically demanding circuit. Would it still be good there? And the answer is a pretty resounding yes. So that upgrade that was introduced at Monza really has transformed the Ferrari.
So big tick in the box for Ferrari.
Totally. Red Bull have definitely made a lot of progress. It started becoming apparent in Singapore. In Baku, and it was continued in Singapore. But in the 4-week break we've had since then, they've clearly done a lot of good work, because that car is now, certainly in the fast sections, is by far the fastest thing in the place. And it was able to combine that with still a reasonable balance in the slow speed section. And that's where previously, when the car was struggling, that's what it couldn't do. It couldn't combine decent balance, low speed or high speed, and high speed. And this weekend it has, and it's fallen down to the Ferrari it didn't look after its tyres quite as well. I think that was the real difference between the Ferrari and the Red Bull this weekend. Rather than raw pace, it was just tyre tech.
That's a season-long strength for the Ferrari. That's always been there. Yeah,
completely. So I think Red Bull has made very definite progress. McLaren, I think, is this is not a track which is very well suited to that car's traits, but it was still quick enough for Lando to put it on pole, even though he might have been rescued by George Russell's accident. Not a certainty that he was. I mean, but Verstappen was still actually trailing by a hundredth or two at the end of Sector 2, but he was going very quickly in the subsequent corners, and he might have been able to have shaded them.
And had lost time in turn 19, hadn't he, on the first
run, yes.
So there was an easy chunk to
He was thinking, without that I would have been on pole, so therefore I'll just copy and paste. But he wasn't actually quite as quick on the second run up to the end of Sector 2 as he had been in the first run. But, it was all nip and tuck. So I think that the McLaren can come to a circuit which doesn't suit it and fight for pole. I think says that it's still a very, very potent tool. And Mercedes is just they came here with a big upgrade. it remains just the most capricious thing. It was stunningly fast at times on Friday, and then for no reason that anyone on the team could fathom, it was hopeless on Saturday. And it was just, slightly higher track temperature. That's about the only thing you could say was different. And it really didn't. They had a rubbish weekend, really, from there. George Russell drove a great race from the pit lane to 6th place, but it's slim pickings for a team of this standard.
Yeah, certainly not a great weekend for them. Rather hard work.
The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merrill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
You saw that play when your QB dropped back, looked off the safety, and threw a dime deep for the go-ahead touchdown. That's not just hall-worthy, that's wall-worthy, and you can own a piece of it when you shop the unrivaled selection of trading cards and memorabilia on eBay, the home of collectibles since 1995. Huddle up with 132 million users around the world to find that rookie patch auto you can't find anywhere else. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Plus, with eBay Authenticity Guarantee for trading cards, you know that what you buy is the real deal. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's right, your collecting journey kicks off right here, right now at ebay.com/theathletic. Come through and collect with us today.
Right, Ben, we'll kick off part two by talking a little bit more about Mercedes. As Mark said earlier, it was all over the place, really. But this was an extraordinary weekend, even by their standards, because they were stunningly fast on Friday. Should have been on pole for the sprints. Then that all seemed to evaporate, and it was terrible. And then George Russell actually came through pretty effectively in the race from the pit lane to 6th place. So how do you unravel that? Can you take anything positive or negative or anything from it, or is it just a weekend of madness?
I mean, weekend of madness, I think, is a good description. I don't think even Mercedes understand what's happened. And I mean, that's been the kind of eternal battleground for them under this rule set, hasn't it? Just when you feel like they've kind of got a handle on things, it seems to get away from them again. They've slipped back, I think, to being quite clearly the 4th best team in that group of 4. It's kind of feeling like a group of 3 with them on the periphery now.
Toto Wolff said we're underdogs again.
Yeah, and there you go. You see, so it's in their heads as well. I mean, the pattern to me seems to be that if the track is cooler, less grippy, if everybody's just pushing a little bit less into the high grip, get the car as low as you possibly can, go flat out situation, they're more competitive. You know, their better races tend to be high speed tracks, but also when it's, a bit wet, slippy, cool. As soon as it gets hot, they seem to struggle. And this weekend was kind of in some ways typical of that. You mentioned they were prodigiously fast in sprint qualifying, and they really were. Pretty good on the medium tyre, and then on the soft, there's a chance that Hamilton was kind of in the mix for the pole there before he lost it a bit at turn 12 when there was the yellow flag thing with Colapinto.
Yellow flag for Colapinto, yeah.
Yeah, Russell was near as damn it in that same fight. And then, as the track kind of gripped up and everybody got their heads around, the fact it was a sprint weekend and lots of upgrades and trying to get, the setup refined, but without having the benefit of normal practice sessions, it just kind of, it got away from it. It felt like they were trying to go with the pack and run the car harder, find more pace. That Wolff was insistent that the upgrade was worth time over one lap for qualifying, but it looked like the car was so edgy and peaky with that package on. And you saw Russell have that massive accident at the end of qualifying. Hamilton have a similar accident at the start of the race, on that curb turning into turn 19. Hamilton wasn't as aggressively on that curb because he wasn't pushing as hard as Russell obviously was at the end of a qualifying lap. But it was basically the identical moment, just at a lower speed for Lewis. And of course, Russell's race happened on, I think Wolff called it the July floor, because they didn't have the spare parts. He totaled the car in qualifying, had to revert to an old package, and then the car looked decent in the race. So I just wonder if it's one of those classic 2024 ground effect rules situations where, as Alonso said, sometimes when you try to get the car on the absolute knife edge on the limit, everything just falls apart. Whereas if you can run in a window, and I think Ferrari really understands this quite well now, where you're at kind of 90 or 95% of the potential, but have a consistent balance and a consistent car in the race, especially, you can get so much more out of it. And I think, Russell enjoyed a relatively straightforward race to, was it fifth or sixth, wasn't he? Piastri was fifth. A relatively straightforward race to sixth from a pit lane start, just because he had a nice, stable, consistent platform.
Yeah, it's amazing how often this has been the story for Mercedes. There's definitely something that they need to get to the bottom of. Very, very sensitive, and the drivers frustrated as always. Right, we've got a good 25 odd minutes into this podcast. We haven't talked about this yet, Mark, so we're going to have to tackle it now before we get onto the midfield, and that's the Red Bull controversy. Can you explain what we know about what they were or were not doing with their floor bib adjuster setup?
They had a second mechanism to adjust the height of the bib, which is the leading edge of the floor, one that's accessed from inside. They have the conventional one underneath, which is the one where you would just do a quick change for floor height in a practice session, say. And the other one they claim is more for accurately aligning the floor with the chassis, so it's absolutely perfectly aligned. When you put on a new floor, and that's not something you do mid sessions. It's something that happens in between sessions, and that's what they say the extra mechanism is for. Now, there's nothing illegal about having an extra mechanism, but all that's happened on the realization that it has this feature, which it has had for the previous 3 years, and is on the open source parts list at the FIA, so anybody could have seen it in any of the previous 3 years.
Yeah, all the teams have access to those designs.
Yeah. It was realized suddenly that, hang on, this could allow you to change the floor height in parc fermé, so yes, in theory it could allow you to do that, but there's no suggestion, there's any evidence that this has happened. But the fact that it's possible to do, in theory, has created controversy. But that seems a weird sort of logic to me, because it's possible to cheat on any of the other areas that you could cheat on. But that doesn't follow logically that therefore all the other teams must cheat, because there are all these other opportunities to have cheated. So why does this one mean that Red Bull must have cheated? I just don't get it. I don't see it at all.
Yeah, currently the argument, the suspicion among the other teams is, why would you design it that way unless you were going to do that? Which is fine. It arouses suspicion, but suspicion doesn't actually tell you anything. The FIA has put a seal on it, so it can't be used under Part 4. So that's a good pragmatic fix going forward. There's obviously the suspicion about what's been going on for the past few years, and as it stands, there's no evidence that it has been used, and that's what we need. And that's not saying absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Yeah. What it means is we don't have the evidence. Yeah. The CCTV that monitors the garages, that obviously doesn't get kept forever.
So the early weekend stories that Red Bull has been caught cheating is just so fundamentally and completely wrong. It absolutely has not. There's no evidence of it being caught cheating. What's happened is that someone's discovered a mechanism by which it could cheat. But there are lots of mechanisms by which all the teams could cheat. So, that's it.
Yeah, and as Nicholas Tombassis, the single-seater director of the FIA, has said, I can't say for sure they didn't use it, but what I can say is we have no evidence to say they did. So that's the thing. It's one of those situations. It's going to continue to go on. I think there's hope there may be somebody who will talk and say, yes, we've adjusted that or whatever within the team or something. But that's what it would take, because like I say, the CCTV doesn't exist. It's a really easy change, so you probably wouldn't even notice it if it had happened. And that's why my sort of position is, until there's some evidence, then it can't go any further. And I must admit, yeah, it does look weird, the design, but unless there's some weird argument for it, it would be such an egregious case of cheating. It's not a grey area. It's not a flexi wing.
Yeah,
it is outright deception.
It would be a very, very crude cheat, because usual ways of getting an advantage through the regulations is to exploit grey areas so that you can argue the wording of a regulation. And it's usually very clever and sophisticated. And Red Bull have been masters of that in the past. But this wouldn't be that. There wouldn't be anything particularly clever about that. It would just be black and white. You cannot adjust things in Parc Fermé. So that would just, you wouldn't be able to defend it. And given that it's so easy to see, it's been on it's on the parts list and has been for years. Given that it's so easy to see and would be such a black and white clear offence, it just seems highly unlikely that that's what they've been doing.
Yeah, it's certainly been a high-risk move. There are definitely rival teams who are absolutely certain it's been used, but they can't actually provide the evidence. They just say, well, why would you do it if not? So that this is the circle it's stuck in. Till you've got evidence, you know why.
Well, also, given that they've had this different way of doing things for years, at least as far back as 2022, I remember, I think, your report from the Belgian Grand Prix that year, Mark, made mention of the fact that both Red Bull drivers, to avoid grounding out their car's plank, had to take extra care not to go too hard through Eau Rouge in the compression or attack the curves. And the only benefit of having this or using this adjuster in Parc Fermé, to my mind, is that you could raise the floor height between qualifying and the race.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have to do that. So
you could run low in qualifying to be super quick, and then not worry about the kind of grounding legality problem that caught out Mercedes and Ferrari at Austin last year. But Red Bull had that mechanism in theory. They didn't use that at Spa. They got the drivers to drive the circuit in a particular way to make sure the car was within the limits. So
legal at the end of the race,
Yeah, exactly. So if it was so easy to do this surreptitious floor adjustment in Parc Fermé, they would have just done that, surely.
Yes, why didn't you do it at Spa?
Why didn't you do it at Spa? It just seems to me like title fight psychology. It's a way of kind of trying to destabilise a rival. McLaren banging the drum really hard because they want to put a bit of pressure on Red Bull, having been under pressure themselves over flexi wings previously. It's just a good old bit of back and forth, I think.
Yeah, and until such time as there is some evidence to the contrary, that's the position you have to take on it. So, I'm sure there'll be continue to be talk about this. People will be looking for this evidence. But the good thing is it's sealed now, so at least that's shut down. So, as Nicholas Tombassis said, that's so the insinuations will stop. Let's go back to the racing now, Ben, because in the sprint race, Haas was a clear cast in the midfield. Yeah, Kevin Magnussen 7th, Nico Hülkenberg 8th. Hülkenberg then won Class B in the Grand Prix itself in 8th. But RB returnee Liam Lawson finished 9th, bagged 2 points on his comeback. How impressed were you with him? Yeah,
I think he had a really, really impressive first weekend back. I mean, the highlights for him, the 3rd place in Q1, Grand Prix qualifying, that was really good. Obviously, he didn't take a meaningful part in the rest of the session because he had a grid penalty. So his job after that was to help Yuki Tsunoda and try to tow him round to a better time. I think in some ways he was set up to have a really good first weekend because he had the benefit of that completely brand new power unit. that would certainly have helped him out, but not the pressure of all of his performances counting straight away. The qualifying was kind of a free hit for him. I know he said he was disappointed not to be able to kind of continue the form through, but you would say that if he'd been third in Q1. Had it not been so impressive in Q1, maybe he would have felt differently, but it was a good statement for him to just be bang so much on the pace straight away. And the race, I think it was a good race. I think it was slightly flattered from a strategic point of view because there were five cars that started on the hard tyre. Okay, you kind of discount the two Mercedes because they're not in the same race as the midfield cars, not quite yet. Anyway, even though they're doing their best to obviously, reverse down the grid at the moment. But he was in a race with kind of Stroll's Aston and Colapinto's Williams, and he beat Colapinto's Williams, didn't he, on identical strategy, starting behind it. So that has to go down as a good performance, I think, because Colapinto's been very impressive in the Williams so far, and also managed to outdo him. The overall position was slightly flattered by others kind of getting themselves into trouble. That I think it was Magnussen that triggered the earliest round of pit stops for people on the medium tyre in that Class B fight, and that got a few cars stuck in traffic as they were trying to come through later, and that meant kind of running long on the hard as Lawson did. He was able to get out ahead of a lot of those cars, including his own teammate. Pretty much a kind of perfect first weekend back, I think, for him. And useful for him that his teammate had a difficult race, and obviously Sergio Perez in the non-upgraded Red Bull also had quite a laborious race to sixth as well, not particularly impressive.
Yeah, difficult weekend for Perez, but yeah, the floor change is significant enough that I think we can not quite give him an entirely free pass, but I think that's quite a big asterisk against this weekend. But yeah, I was impressed with Lawson. I think he was producing good pace immediately. He didn't quite get it all together in sprint qualifying, and then the sprint race was sort of stuck down the order, battling with Alonso. And then, I think the race was good. I mean, Yuki Tsunoda obviously finished behind him. Now, that was a bit circumstantial because Tsunoda was one of those cars who stopped early. As I mentioned, if you stopped earlier than Sainz, you were in trouble, and that kind of ruined his race. But then what ruined it more was getting irritated and having a spin, so that didn't help. So put it this way, I wouldn't say that Lawson has destroyed Tsunoda and it's a disaster for Tsunoda, brilliant for Lawson. But what I think Lawson's done is made a really, really good restart to his Formula One career. This is a nice foundation to come out with 2 points in a race where you start at the back because of 60 places of grid penalties is a really good foothold for him to start to build from. And let's see how he gets on over the next 5 races. But 2 points is a very, very good return. And Mark, there was mention of Franco Colapinto there. It's probably his toughest weekend overall, and obviously it's his first sprint, so that took a little bit of adapting. So came through to score that point for 10th. What do you make of his and Williams' performance?
Yeah, Williams was a little bit disappointing, both cars going out in Q1. But yeah, Colapinto sort of pulled his weekend together from there, really. I think he did a good solid job. There wasn't really a direct comparison with his teammate Alex Albon because Alex had the contact with Ocon at the first corner and then had an early stop lap 3 to get repairs. So yeah, it wasn't. He didn't have the gauge there, the direct gauge of his teammate. But yeah. I mean, to come through to the points after going out in Q1 is a good effort by anyone's standards.
Yeah, very, very good for him, I think, too. After having had that month off, come to a conventional circuit and have a decent weekend. I think Williams probably underachieved overall because I think there was some decent pace in that car. They probably should have been a little bit stronger, but at least they've come away with a point, although...
Windy track, though, wasn't it, Ed? I feel like that's still a limitation for them. The way Alex Albon was talking, actually, I think post-qualifying, that I got the sense that he was talking about some inconsistencies in sort of vague terms. I feel like maybe that old wind sensitivity weakness was kind of rearing its ugly head for them again.
Yeah, and actually the upgraded Williams after their recent major package does seem a little bit capricious still as well, a little bit like not quite as extreme as the Mercedes, but yeah, they're still trying to get on top of that. There was a little subplot involving fastest lap, which of course is being dropped, the point for fastest lap next year, which everyone is delighted for in the entire universe. Also, I do surveys conducted by me state that 100% are in favour.
Well done,
so I'm
Ed.
pleased with that, but But actually, Colapinto had fastest lap quite late on, and then they pitted Ocon, who wasn't going to score, to nick the fastest lap point off him because they're battling for, 8th in the Constructors' Championship. So that was a little fun subplots there. But yeah, it was funny, the midfield battle, because actually it was Pierre Gasly in the Alpine who led it early on. He sat in 6th place, but he was one of those who stopped early, stopped on lap 18. So it was Gasly 6th, Magnussen 7th, Tsunoda 8th in the early running. They stopped on lap 17 and 18 variously, and it just knackered their race. But Gasly, who's the only one who had the Alpine upgrade, was properly quick in the sort of main event part of it, Grand Prix qualifying and the race, and that's really positive for Alpine. As I said to him after the race, as you said, you've executed the race poorly, you've not optimised it, you finished 12th. Yet a few weeks ago, you could drive brilliantly, execute everything perfectly, and you've been 15th. So that at least says Alpine's making some progress. So well done to them. But yeah, it could have been a very different story in the midfield, and yeah, just the fact this was such a one-stop race was a little bit of a surprise to many people.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
The Acura ZDX is more than just 100% electric. It's 100% Acura energy. With nearly 500 horsepower and an impressive range rating, the ZDX Type S delivers 100% excitement and brings unprecedented performance to the Type S family. And it's 100% loaded with innovative features like an 18-speaker Bang & Olufsen premium sound system, available hands-free cruise, and Google built-in. Test drive the Acura ZDX and unlock electrified performance today.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Right. Let's get on to part 3, and as is our want, this is all about answering questions from the Race Members Club. For more information on how to join the Race Members Club, hit the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for the race to find out the many, many benefits, which includes bonus members-only podcasts, as well as the chance to ask us questions. Loads of questions, as always. We'll do a Your Questions Answered podcast midweek as well, but here's a quick blast through some. Ben, Damon Needham, says, Verstappen and Red Bull are seemingly back on the pace. Does this, in your eyes, mean it's championship done for 2024?
Well, hello, Damon. Great name, by the way. They certainly have improved. Championship-wise, I mean, drivers, I've kind of always felt like it was done. I've never really felt like Norris has been properly in it. And a weekend like this where, there was a chance to take points out of Verstappen and he's ended up losing ground, it just feels like it's inevitably getting further away, and obviously the races are running out for him to really turn it around. He needs Verstappen to have a shocker, some kind of DNF or just a massive point swing in one go, I think, to really light it. If it keeps up like this, where Verstappen is just in the mix all the time, and even if Norris is able to win a few more races, he's not going to be able to overcome that bigger deficit. The constructors, though, I mean, now Ferrari are, managing to finish 1-2 and be so quick that the TV cameras don't even want to look at them. That feels like it's really alive. I don't think Red Bull can win that, especially with Perez's level of performance. And this kind of suggestion also from him that he might not get the same floor as Verstappen particularly soon. He kept getting asked about Mexico and he was like, well, I'm not sure, maybe, I hope so. It looks good. I look forward to it. But they need to really lift his performance quickly if they want to come back in that constructors fight. So I feel like that's probably McLaren versus Ferrari now, isn't it? And if Ferrari's really back, and what Mark was saying about the Monza upgrade is true, and they're going to be right there from now to the end of the season, it's time for kind of Piastri to not have a rough weekend like he's had, because otherwise McLaren are going to be under pressure, and we might be looking at Verstappen winning the Drivers' Championship and, unbelievably, Ferrari winning the Constructors' Championship.
They're 48 points off, which is interesting. I rather foolishly wrote them off from the Constructors' Championship after Singapore. So, it's still...
Constructors-wise, that's doable, isn't it? It's not the same as the Verstappen-Norris 50-odd point gap.
On a normal weekend, it's 44 points for a 1-2 and fastest lap, isn't it? And there's still 2 sprints left. But I'd still say McLaren are favourites. But, it's very, 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 very interesting. This season just keeps twisting and turning, doesn't it? Mark, a question for you from Andrew Hire, who says, is Lewis Hamilton just pushing too hard, or is the car just really hard to drive?
I think there's two components to that, Andrew. I think the car is very, very difficult to drive. It's very inconsistent, so you don't know what you're going to get necessarily. And I think that's part of it. Another part of it is that this generation of car doesn't lend itself naturally to the way Hamilton naturally drives, which is a very aggressive corner entry, late on the brakes, and a lot of steering input to get the rotation. So, he's a great enough driver that he can, of course, adapt to what's necessary. But I think it doesn't automatically mean it's his favoured way of driving is the best way for these cars. So I think there's a couple of elements in there. His natural style is probably a little bit too aggressive for the car, but he's adaptable enough that he will be able to tailor around that, and I think his specific problems are more to do with this car this year.
Next question I'll take from Jan Alexander. Sending this before the race, so maybe the question looks dumb later tonight. Well, fortunately it didn't, as Haas went well in the race too. Do the sprint results and qualifying hints of even more genuine progress for Haas? And do they now look strong favourites to beat RB to 6 in the Constructors' Championship, or did they benefit from any track characteristics or circumstances that could lead to a different picture in a week's time? No, I think absolutely they were the fifth strongest team this weekend. 7th and 8th in the sprints. They should have had both cars in the points really in the race, but Magnussen suffered from that early stop and then had that late call to make a second stop, which didn't quite work for him. So Haas are really good. What impresses me about Haas is that they've got a nice consistent car. They've probably got the most consistent car in the midfield, because even on weekends where they don't score points, they have a habit of finishing 11th. Hasn't Nico Hülkenberg got 5 or 7 11th places? Loads of 11th places for Hülkenberg anyway. So their peaks are very good. Their troughs are still pretty good. So that shows a good balanced car. It hasn't got any of this capriciousness we've talked about with Mercedes and with Williams. Every car's got a tiny bit of that, but it's not a problem for them. And the other thing is the fact that they're throwing upgrades onto the car and they are working. They had a Silverstone decent upgrade package. This one was following on from that. Not quite as comprehensive as the Silverstone one, but still pretty comprehensive. And the great thing for them is they decided to split the car. So they put Hülkenberg on the new one, Magnussen on the old one. And that was how they ran through the sprint. Then they got to the end of the sprint race, thought, this is working. We'll put the upgrade on Kevin's car as well. Stuck it on Magnussen's car. He went straight out and qualified really well in it. So this is a nice to drive car, a car that's consistent. And it's not track characteristics, because pretty much all tracks this car is pretty good. So Haas are really impressive. They're not going to be the fifth strongest car every single weekend, but of that midfield group, they're going to be the strongest one. I'll be surprised if they don't finish 6th in the Constructors' Championship. And of course, they took some, for the standards of this part of the championship battle, big points out of RB and moved ahead of them this weekend. Right, coming back round to you, Ben, a question from David Tripler. What's your take on the Alonso versus Lawson drama? The sprint, of course, this was
the sprint. Well, I think part of it is Alonso being a bit grumpy. You mentioned, Ed, how strong Haas is looking in the midfield fight. I mean, they are able to do what Aston can't do, which is bring an upgrade package that definitively works and moves them forward. Aston just seem to be perennially stuck in this situation where they change bits on the car and they don't even know if it's better or worse. That seems to be Alonso's consistent feedback. So I think he's getting pretty fed up of the downfall he's had from competing for... I know they struggled badly last year at this phase of the season, but, by Brazil, he was back on the podium. He had so many great results. In the sprint, he was fighting for 17th or 16th place. Just dross positions for him. And then you've got Lawson, this kind of young, hungry kid coming back in, desperate to prove himself, fighting for these rubbish positions that, are so far away from the tiny sprint points, like his, whole career depends on it. And I think Alonso was particularly irritated by the way Lawson did an almost Verstappen type jink in the braking zone approaching turn 12. And Alonso, I think, felt like he had to take evasive action. Obviously had a massive shunt further back on that straight with Lance Stroll when Alonso was still racing for Alpine. And he was very...
when he hurled the car into the barrier at high speed,
yes,
and somehow finished the race.
Yes, it was very delicate in his description of that incident in not blaming the son of his future employer as well. But anyway, so I think it brought back bad memories. And he was particularly perturbed by Lawson's aggressive defence of, what was basically a nothing position in a nothing race in the grand scheme of that weekend. And I suppose a sort of minor feud. I don't know if it will last. I think Alonso was just trying to make a point to a kind of young guy. I mean, young drivers are aggressive, that's for sure. I think Alonso just felt that Lawson was a little bit over the line, but in this case, the stewards didn't agree.
Yeah, and Lawson thought that Alonso was deliberately annoying him at the start of qualifying as well. After that, he said, with the lunge into turn one, yeah. So that was quite funny. I should also say, actually, Lawson did a great move on Alonso on the first lap of the sprint race at the hairpin, a late move, completely legitimate, nice pass. So maybe that just started the annoyance for Alonso. But I don't think anybody had money on Alonso versus Lawson aggro this weekend. So that's
definitely
a funny subplot. Let's see if that ever flares up again. Mark, a question from Charlie Pascoe about strategic trends. Is there any reason as to why McLaren, more than any other team it seems, usually goes for a tyre delta? Is it something that favours their car more than the others? So why do McLaren often end up running longer than others?
It happens when they're not when they don't have track position. We saw it. I think most notably before today at
Spain. Spain was the really obvious one.
It's partly the fact that it's good on its tyres, so you can still keep up a reasonable pace on very old tyres. But it's also the fact that it's usually if you have that trait in your car, it's usually a more surefire way of making up positions and trying to do it on track, especially if you're racing Verstappen.
Next question I'll take from Dan Neal. How do we get past this terrible rule of ahead at the apex? Max just makes sure he's on the inside, brakes so deep that he makes sure he's ahead at the apex, then doesn't care if he stays on track or not. As long as the other driver is off track on the outside, they can't overtake. It's a really poor rule and Verstappen uses it all the time when defending. As we said, Verstappen knows what the guidelines are and uses them very, very well. I am not a big fan of the way the guidelines are set because there are a lot of factors they don't take into account and they might encourage you to take advantage of relative speed that will compromise you later in the corner and that kind of thing. So, I'm not very keen on the exact structure of the racing guidelines. They're well-intentioned, trying to get consistency, but I think they sometimes box people into a corner. So how do we get past it? Well, it seems to be here to stay.
We talked about it earlier on. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of having track limits defined by lines.
Well, it's funny you say that because the next question I'm going to throw at you, Ben, from Aaron Riley. Is there anything to be done about the prevalence of 5-second overtaking penalties other than let them race? My personal vote. I guess track limits is part of that, but a lot of 5-second penalties for overtaking and forcing people off track and busting track limits, etc.
Yeah, well, track limits. I think we would all agree with this, and Anthony Davidson said it as well on Sky Sports F1 show. You need a physical limit on the outside of the track. That gravel that's on the outside of turn 19 that did for Lewis Hamilton, you need that around the outside of turn 12 so that when, in the case of Verstappen and Norris, Verstappen runs Norris off the track, he goes into the gravel, that will look different to someone watching the incident because it will change the dynamic of the defending driver keeping his position by basically making the other guy go into the gravel. Whereas if he's got half tarmac runoff to go onto, there's just this feeling that he can, the guy on the outside who's off the track can have more control. I mean, Norris was able to complete the move, wasn't he? by just not being on the track. And it just changes the perception of the incident. I agree with this let them race thing. It feels to me like the best way would just be to kind of strip it all back and try to come at it afresh. At the moment you've got this ridiculous situation, whereas if you're the car being overtaken on your outside, you're protected much more by the guidelines. You can almost do whatever you want. Verstappen's really adept at just making sure he doesn't career into the other car or do something really obvious like lock up. There are factors they take into consideration, like apparently, like the condition of the cars as they're arriving into the corner, whether somebody's out of control, whether they've done something to contribute to the incident. You could definitely say the way Verstappen drove in turn 12 contributed to the incident, but it's not absolutely definitive because he was completely in control of his car and he was still within the track for most of the corner. It was only at the very exit, obviously, where he was running outside of track limits. And then, of course, there were strikes. So Verstappen goes off the track while Norris is coming around his outside. But is that against the overtaking rules? No, it is against the track limits. But as long as he's within his 3 or 4 strikes or whatever, he's not going to get a penalty. They seem to then give Norris a 5-second penalty for going off the track, but that was a mitigated penalty. They said it would have been more, but they took account of Verstappen's part in forcing Norris off the track. So they sort of simultaneously did take account of it and didn't. It's just bananas to me. So confusing. So yeah, I'm all in favour of binning the track limits rules, binning the overtaking guidelines before they just become more entrenched and more ridiculous, and just going back to a more old school approach, please.
Next question for you, Mark, from Esteban Rivera. Lando stresses me out. He did not cover the first corner and then screwed up the overtake on Max Verstappen. In layman's terms, he doesn't seem to have it. Is it a mental thing or a flaw in how he drives?
I don't think it's a flaw. I think it's he's in a part of the contest that he's never been in before and is not yet entirely comfortable there at certain moments of high stress. But I don't think that that's necessarily a permanent trait. I think that's something that we've seen in drivers before, and they've fixed it with a bit more experience. They get a bit more seasoned at running at the front all the time against the same guys. And I think I think I did a column on it recently for the race, and I compared it to Niki Lauda's 1974 season, where he made a few key pressure errors that just were, someone had not run consistently at the front before among the big boys. And this was his first time, and he was very, very impressive, and he's super fast, and he set a load of pole positions and won races. But there were 2 or 3 things that lost him that championship, and it was a completely winnable championship, and he blew it. Yeah, nobody would say Lauda didn't have it. Lauda became one of the legends of the sport.
Yeah. Norris is just not as streetwise as Max, is he, basically? And
not at the moment, no.
No, and once he figures that out, I mean, you could tell from, if you watch back the Austria incident where they're battling for the lead, just the way they talk on the radio as that whole thing progressed, you can hear the stress in Lando's voice as he's kind of sighing and thinking, oh God, what have I got to do to get past this guy? Whereas for Max, it's just like, I've been here a million times, and that's the key difference, isn't it?
This is very much why I've talked about this season as the chance for Norris to kind of get that experience and be cured in battle. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm very interested to see how that happens, because when I talk about mental strength in the car, it's not about any of that stuff Helmut Marko was talking about and things he does. It's purely and simply about whether you can just kind of make sound judgments in the heat of battle and execute your skills as if it doesn't matter, when you just do what you do, but do that when it matters more than anything because of the situation. So that's the thing that I want to see Lando develop a little bit. But yeah, I think that's something we'll see over the next 18 months, how he learns from this. It's a great way to learn how to do that at the front. All right, the next question comes from Matthew McMahon. I'll take, if Ferrari can get a bit of consistency with the car, can they challenge for the Constructors' title? Yeah, as we've mentioned, they could 48 points behind McLaren, 8 behind Red Bull, and yeah, the consistency will be very, very important. I still wouldn't put my money necessarily on Ferrari, but they could do. But then again, we're going to go to Mexico next, aren't we? the turbo configuration of the Ferrari engine maybe not ideal for the it's not ideal for those sorts of conditions where the engines are strangled by the low air density. So yeah, could be tricky, but I'm much more interested in just seeing the confirmation of the progress. They've made a few changes to the way they work the wind tunnel and all these sorts of things. This is all really good stuff for 2025 progress for them, and the hopes that we'll have multiple teams fighting out again next year.
They need Sainz to be on Austin form all the way through to the end of the season as well, don't they?
Yes.
I felt like he was really on one this weekend, right there with Leclerc, and that's not always the case. So I think they could potentially have the platform to do it, but they need kind of both drivers at kind of Austin level all the way through to the end of the season.
Yeah, very true. Question for you, Mark, from John Ayres. Did Liam Lawson just pass his audition for a 2025 Red Bull season at the same time Sergio Perez fail his yet again?
It certainly looks that way at this moment in time. Yeah, I mean, we've got a few races to go yet, and lots of different things can happen in, what have we got, 5 races left? But yeah, that's certainly a very, very strong for opening audition, and a fairly unconvincing performance from Checo.
Ben from Ryan Norrie. Thoughts on Toto Wolff's comments to George over the radio? George Russell, did Verstappen get a penalty for that turn 1? Toto, no, he didn't get a penalty, and at the end Lando got a penalty for being fast off and overtaking on the outside. I guess it's a bit biased decision making, but not surprising.
Yeah, well, not this again. I think the problem is here that there's comparison of apples and oranges, isn't there? So, I mean, I've made my position on the whole guideline situation quite clear, but accepting that it's a reality we have to deal with, I think there are people within F1 who don't really understand the difference between what they've set out as criteria for the stewards to judge moves when a guy is coming around the outside versus a guy on the inside. You know, Russell on Bottas was on the inside, and you're therefore considered the aggressor. And if you run the guy you're overtaking out of room on the outside of the track, it's a penalty according to the guidelines. Now, that's not to say that can't be gamed in the way that Verstappen is kind of gaming the system as a defensive driver. Bottas, who is able to just basically hang on around the outside, even though the move is done. And effectively, I think as Martin Brundle put it on the Sky commentary, you can just guarantee your opponent gets a penalty. I think that was kind of at play. I mean, Piastri tried to compare Lando and Max's incident with his own incident with, I think it was Gasly, certainly one of the Alpines in the sprint. But again, it's not the same. Piastri was going down the inside and then ran the guy who was passing out of room on the exit, which this weekend was a penalty, whereas Norris was trying to come around the outside of Max. So it's a different situation. And of course, comparing to turn 1, well, that's a complete crapshoot, isn't it? Because in this case, they went, we're not even going to look at it. It's turn 1 at Austin. There's always chaos. But of course, last year at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and some people use this comparison, Verstappen got penalised for going down the inside of Charles Leclerc and forcing him off the track. But of course, the corner profiles are totally different. You know, Austin has this uphill approach and tight apex, whereas the first corner at the Vegas Strip circuit is this big, long, arcing, super wide left-hander. You know, it's almost like a carousel hairpin, just without the gradient. So again, a different situation. You know, there was so much track to the left of Verstappen when he went inside Leclerc at Vegas. You almost had to penalise him. It was ridiculous. But at Austin, it's a bit more marginal just because of the way the track goes. So, yeah, I mean, people are going to be unhappy in these kind of situations, and someone's not. And I think, you know, for Toto, it's just a really bad end to what had looked like being a really strong weekend. So I think he was probably just feeling a bit emotional.
And the final question I'll take from Jack Aitken, who, as we know, is not the ex-Williams F1 driver and is from Australia. Oscar Piastri just seemed off Lando Norris's pace all weekend. Where was Oscar losing time? Yeah, he was just a little bit off. His race pace was all right, actually. He was very fifth overall, just very, very fifth. Just lacking a little bit in confidence, slightly different approach in qualifying in the slow corners. Obviously, those combination braking and turning things are still a little bit challenging for McLaren. So, yeah, he was just fine this weekend, Piastri. And you will see this is in his second season. And that's why Norris currently is the better driver of those two, because he's got more experience and he's more consistently at that level. And Piastri will still allow a few undulations. And then over time, as he's been doing, those undulations smooth out and he operates at its normal high level. So yeah, this is just one of those weekends. There have been a few this year. Spain, Zandvoort was another one. There have been a few where he's just been a little bit subdued compared to the sky high standards we've seen. But yeah, just one of those weekends where he didn't quite have what Norris had in a car that was a little bit tricky. Well, thanks very much to Ben and Mark, and thanks to everyone who sent in some questions. This, of course, is the first race of a triple header, so we're going to be heading towards Mexico soon, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
You know that feeling, the rush of holding a piece of sports history in your hand, how it connects us to our past and present like nothing else can. Catch the thrill when you shop the unrivaled selection at eBay, the home of collectibles since 1995. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going to ebay.com/theathletic. That's ebay.com/theathletic. Start building your collection today. As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.